Good morning, everyone. So in the beginning of today, I'm just going to speak like I'm your lecturer, and then I'm going to change to Secretary General or whatever I will be. So what are we going to do today? The simulation is called World Climate. Okay? You're going to be a negotiator in a United Nations framework for climate change negotiations. I just want to read to you that this whole exercise with the program that I will show you just now was created by the think tank Climate Interactive in partnership with the MIT Sloan School of Management and the UMass Lowell Climate Change Initiative with support from Mohammed Polytechnic University, just so that we know where we're standing. So what we're going to do today, I'm going to introduce everything. I'm going to give you your roles. I'm going to give you the goal of your exercise. So you have to reach something as the nations of this planet. We're going to have a first round of negotiations. At the end of the first round of negotiations, one person from each of the teams will have to give a 2-minute presentation of your statement or your pledge. Okay, I'm going to explain that to you just now. Then all of these we will plug in the program we're going to use and see what you can achieve with these commitments. How will that affect the temperature change? And then if we don't achieve our goal, we'll have to go, well, whether we do or not, we will go in a second round of negotiations where we will try and be stricter with ourselves, try and be more specific with our goals and our targets, and then the other person of the team will have to give a 2-minute presentation of the pledge. So don't think that you're going to have a spokesperson in the group and then you're going to get over and done with it. You're just going to sit back and there's going to be only one person talking. So first round of negotiation, the one person, second round of negotiation, the other person. So maybe it's a good idea when you start, before the negotiations, you agree within your team who's going to do the first one and who's going to do the second one. Okay. At the end of the second round, we will again plug in your pledges in the program, and we will check what you have achieved this time, and then we will debrief the session. Okay. So as you've seen, you're separated in 3 different country groups. I thought that we could have had different countries per person, but then you don't get to negotiate within a country. So to agree on a strategy within a country group. So I thought maybe having 3 country groups is better. So we have the developed nations. Who are the developed nations? Palayanga and Rosanna, the developed nations led by US, EU, Japan, but also other developed nations like Russia, Eastern Europe, South Korea, Australia, and Canada. So when we start negotiating, you leave back your own ideas. Do you hear, the 2 of you? You leave back your own ideas about what should developed countries do or what should developing do and all of these things. You're representatives of the developed nations. You want the developed nations not to be so much affected. The same applies for all the rest, but I think these 2 were quite strong on the developing nations idea, so we have to get out of ourselves now. Developing A, which is Dylan and Tessie, led by China, India, Brazil, South Africa, Mexico, Indonesia, Philippines, East Asian countries, Thailand, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Pakistan, and Singapore. So we can see in this group, we have developing nations, so traditionally developing nations, but quite emerging economies. Okay, quite strong economies as well. The BRICS are all there, except for Russia. Then we have developing B, which is Ruth and Louis, small island nations and least developed countries representing much of Central, South America, Middle East, and Africa. So in a sense, we can think of it as the poor countries of our planet. It's a shame they don't have anything to eat and nothing to drink. Okay, so when the negotiations start, remember it's you. It's the country group you represent and not you as an individual. So what is this program that we're going to use, where we will test the pledges in C roads? It's a scientifically reviewed policy simulator. We're not going to go through how the model works and the assumptions and all of these things. It's not the idea of this exercise. But just for your information, it's externally reviewed as well. I'll show you later on that in many big climate change negotiations, the leaders or the negotiators get informed by this program before they go into the negotiations. So I'll show you a photo later on where Obama is getting informed from results on C roads. I don't know if that's good or bad now, but okay. So how do you formulate your negotiating strategy? I'm going to take you back to the fact that it's part of your assessment, this one, okay? So before I even talk to the specifics of the negotiations, just think that when you're going to present the 2 minutes up here, you're going to have to illustrate your knowledge of this semester, okay? So you need to show me that you can talk energy and you can talk environment and you can talk the relationships within an economy, okay? So when you go in your negotiating strategy, think of the countries, and you have the briefing in front of you, but think of what are the vital interests of your country groups. What is politically feasible? What is economically feasible? What do you need from the other nations, and what can you offer them? When I will give you the time for the negotiations, you have to talk to other teams and negotiate for the best possible outcome for your group. And then you will prepare a brief intervention speech to outline your intended plans. Now, when you negotiate with each other, there is also one more factor that is going to influence all of these things, and that's Jessie. That's the climate activists, okay? She is not going to come and do a presentation here, okay? Climate activists do not have to pledge on reduction of emissions, but she will participate in the negotiations and the discussions, okay? So she will be the one that can also almost speak to all of you about all of you. Okay, so she is a factor. She's not going to do a presentation here. What I will do now is I'm going to give you 10 minutes to read through your briefings. Okay, you've already started looking at them. And prepare a little bit, and then I'm going to give you more as the Secretary General of the session. Any questions before we go to the actual negotiations? Nothing. Okay, then you can take, let's say, not 10 minutes, let's say 5 minutes to read through your briefings and be ready with that. Let's start with the session now, more formally. And let me take the role that I'm supposed to take, and from now on, you're not yourselves, you are the representatives of your countries or of the country groups. Distinguished delegates, I would like to thank you and welcome you to the Conference of Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Before we do anything else, I should just introduce myself as the Secretary General of the session of the United Nations and the chairman of the session. Firstly, let's congratulate ourselves for having achieved what we achieved in Paris in 2015. That result of that agreement guides us through the future and keep us active in our goal to achieve lower emissions, lower greenhouse gas emissions, as well as making sure we have enough interventions, developments, technologies, etc., and also political willingness to achieve not a further rise in the global temperatures. As I look around the room today, we see people that are young, and certainly within your lifetime or within the lifetime of your children, you will be faced of with the consequences of your decisions today. Okay? So I ask you nothing less than feel the full weight of your decisions for the future of yourselves and for the future of the generations to come on Earth. Your task is straightforward. In order to avoid dangerous climate change, we need to do something. We must achieve emission reductions, and we must stabilize temperature changes. As we've seen in graphs, and it's needless to say, needless to preach the converted, CO2 emissions have been rising steeply through the years. This is a graph from 1960 to 2014. 16. It's a non-discussion anymore. It's an indisputable fact that emissions kept increasing through the last 50 years. To those that argue that climate change has been just an incident, that has been a recurring incident through the years, some research has been done to look at the temperature in hundreds and thousands of years before today. You see the graph here. Of course, we see typical increases in the temperature and typical decreases in the temperature through the years, and we see almost like a cycle, but it's the first time, you see the date is 2013, it's the first time that we have an outlier. We have a big increase in the emissions. Here in this graph, I would like to keep your attention back to the source of emissions. We see deforestation has been almost a constant source of emissions, while especially the fossil fuels have shown a high increase, especially since the 1940s, 50s, with the industrial changes that we have experienced as a planet. And then here, I would just like to show you a projected surface temperature changes for the last 21st century, from 2081 to 2100, relatively to temperatures of the period 86 to 2005. Okay, so you see that it's clear from projections that the temperature is changing, the temperature is rapidly increasing, and we can also see within the planet that different regions will be affected differently. Another example, we see the Lake Chad in 1972. It covers a big area, almost the size of Rwanda, while in 2007 it's almost the size of a small city. Drought is almost a natural disaster that has hit us slowly. It's not an event, it's something that happens slowly in the continent, in the planet. Creates problems such as food insecurity and other issues related highly to the population. Here there are a few statements by the US Department of Defense in 2010-2016. Climate change could have significant geopolitical impacts around the world, contributing to poverty, environmental degradation, and the further weakening of fragile governments. So they try to connect climate change not only with environmental aspects, but also with economic and political aspects, and all the other aspects that deal with the population, like poverty. Climate change will contribute to food and water scarcity, will increase the spread of diseases, and may spur or exacerbate mass migration. The Department of Defense must be able to adapt current and future operations to address the impacts of climate change in order to maintain an effective and efficient US military. So they try also to connect climate change to the idea of peace in our planet. Business as usual scenarios with an increase of 4.5 degrees of Celsius by 2100. Now we see here different country groups, different countries, and how they will behave. It's expected for them to behave. Yes, the other developing saw a high increase in the business of usual scenario, basically because of the population growth. And secondly, because of the lack of technologies and developments happening currently in these countries. So if something changes there, these trends will change. If we look at the impacts of a plus 4 degrees Celsius by 2100, we're going to have a multi-meter sea level rise within decades. Millions of homes will be underwater. Widespread increase in the frequency of drought across the globe. Intense and frequent heat waves and floods in many areas across the globe. So unexpected weather scenarios and irreversible change that we can't take back, which is the most concerning fact of climate change as a negative externality. This is London after a 4-degree increase in the temperature. Yeah, you see that half of the parliament or the first floors of the parliament will be underwater. So we're not talking only the vulnerable areas, we're not talking only about the developing areas, but cities like London, look at Shanghai with a plus 4. These are serious consequences. By 2020, in some countries, yields from rain-fed agriculture could be reduced by up to 50%. Agricultural production, including access to food in many African countries, is projected to be severely compromised, and this would further adversely affect food security and exacerbate malnutrition. So on the one side, in developed countries, we have seen possible consequences when it comes to infrastructure, etc. But most importantly, in many regions of the planet, we're going to see problems like malnutrition, food security, etc. So what is your goal today? Your goal today is to reduce greenhouse gas levels by 2100 at a level that keeps global warming well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. So that's the goal of the session today. You need to agree also on a deal to share costs of mitigation and adaptation fund to aid less developed nations. So with your pledge of emissions, we also need to consider the availability of funds for developing nations. Definitely, it's not going to be easy, but it's going to be worth it. So in your decisions as a country groups, each delegation will set its own fossil fuel emissions targets. You will set firstly, in what year will emissions in your block stop growing, if any? Okay? And the second question will be, in what year, if desired, will your emissions begin to fall? Okay? Thirdly, what you need to say, if emissions will start falling at some point, what will be the percentage of annual decrease in emissions? To give you an example, the blue is the business as usual scenario. So what you need to do, the first discussion is, when will they stop growing? Okay? Stop growing in 2040. The second decision would be, when will the reduction start? So in this example, from 2040 to 2050, the pledge is that emissions will stabilize. So from 2050, the reduction will start. This decrease shows a decision for an annual reduction of 1%. Okay? In that case, I will have to remind you that, or I will have to set the note here that reductions of more than 4% cannot be done. Annually, less than 4%. Well, 5%, sorry. So it's the different scenarios. So in this case, we see that even though the decision for stop growing and stop reducing emissions remain the same, the decision for the annual reduction is the one that actually drives the overall trend. In your pledge, you will also have to mention deforestation and afforestation decisions. So deforestation will take will be ranked from 0 to 1 in a 0 to 1 scale, where 0 means continues the business as usual deforestation path, while 1 means gradually eliminate deforestation over coming decades. The afforestation discussion, 0 is no new area set aside for afforestation. So afforestation means planting new forests, while 1 means maximum feasible afforestation area. So the 1 is stop cutting the forests, that's the deforestation, while afforestation is start planting new forests. Finally, the third part of the pledge is create a green climate fund to vulnerable countries in disaster relief, food and water, immigration and refugees, and emissions reductions. The goal is $100 billion per year. So you have to decide how much will you contribute, how much do you need if you cannot contribute, and what terms. So this is the pledge that you will have to submit. These are all the things that you need to submit here. You have this paper in your files. So at the moment, we'll give you some time to negotiate, discuss with fellow country groups, and in the next 15 minutes, decide on what is your pledge that you're going to make, and then we will proceed with the 3 presentations from the 3 representatives. You have 15 minutes to cover between you and among groups. Okay.
So they need to negotiate.
They need to negotiate among their countries.
Yeah.
Okay, so as the other developing country group, I think we need to work together to correct our situation, although our funding is more limited than the developed country group. So they need to carry more of the brunt of the cost of climate change. Let's put it that way. Because we can't really afford it all, us less. And in your case, since you have quite strong economies within your group.
Yeah, but we definitely agree that climate change is a problem. Also, all the data shows that the developed nations have been benefiting from huge emissions for the past 100 or so years. So I do think we're in the same boat here.
On that point, as developing A, your emissions are going to surpass the developed countries in the next 5 years.
Irrespective,
we are willing to obviously contribute substantially to the alleviation of poverty in the developing nations that are going to happen.
The thing is, our increase in emissions is expected because how else do you expect us to grow using the resources that we have, the technology that we have, and the energy resources that we each respectively have? Looking at the countries that we do have under our bracket in both developing groups, would find that most of the resources are fossil fuels that we have at our disposal. So I feel that our focus should go into putting more efforts into research and development in finding energy efficient ways that we can either continue to use the fossil fuels but reduce emissions even though we're using these dirty fuels.
Based on your,
I'm thinking we should really stop to be selfish, because it benefits all of us, right? It's true we did emit in the past, but the difference that we didn't know that it was causing the climate change. Now look at most of you guys, you developing countries, most of you are in Africa and some of you in Asia. We have what we call the climate. So if the climate does change, we'll benefit from that. You guys will be worse off.
but the emissions.
So what we're trying to do here is let's work something out. When you get something out, we get something out, because we need to stop this.
So you both mentioned that you're willing to pledge funds towards this initiative.
Yeah.
What contribution are we talking about? And apportioned how, in your eyes, towards the richer developing countries and us as the poorer developing countries? And on a second point to that, following on what Dylan said, he mentioned that you guys as developed countries were one of the main causes of climate change. That was purely on emissions, right? But their emissions are exceeding yours. So if it was that the emissions are going to drive economic growth, like Leslie mentioned, our emissions should increase substantially since we are the poorest of the poor. Their economic growth has been outperforming even the developing countries in some sense, and ours have been stagnant at best over the last 30 years. So we are the ones that need to boost it. They have the funding. I mean, they've got some of the most powerful economies on their side. Even though they're poor, but that's purely based on population. We are poor and we have a large number of population. We have relatively low food security. We suffer the effects of climate change even stronger than anyone else. So I'm calling for the funding that you mentioned to be mostly redirected towards our countries.
I think the funding should be split.
Well, it is going to be
I'm saying yes, but how? We should get more.
Yes, you would. You should get more. Yes, we understand that. It's just a matter of even in these negotiations. I feel that since we have China under our bracket, let's be honest, they are one of the what's called technologically advanced economies globally, and we can push to if we get the financial resources we need. We can work together to develop the technologies we need to curb emissions so that they can grow using the energy resources that they have, but not emit as much as we have both emitted over the years so far.
But how would we fund that? Yes, we have the Sahel Desert with a lot of sunlight and we can install photovoltaic power, but we don't have the money for that.
Again, but
That's
You
where they
can
come.
Well, they can fund it. You can develop the technology. You're going to grant us the technology free of charge.
Not free of charge, but it is a matter of working together.
you're gonna have to pay.
Well, we're working together. If you guys are going to develop the research and development, it should be shared amongst the
I agree.
developing
Equally, since
countries
it's going to
equally,
benefit all of
because
us.
it's going to benefit all of you. And since developed countries have already done most of this research and development, they should be the ones sharing this.
No, I think we can definitely talk about it discount, but I mean, you still have to fund the research and development somehow.
And we are going to put our resources into.
So it is for the greater good, but it can't be free.
We also need something in return, though.
You are also going to
We fund you, but
You are also going to
when I look at your country, guys, we have like the biggest forest so far, especially in South America, and the equatorial forest in the DRC. So what we need from you guys is stop deforestation. That's the one thing that we're asking for. And we also want you guys to adopt more renewables. If you can just harness the power of solar, of the sun from the Sahara Desert, we're able we can
To
control.
touch on your point, and as Ruth, maybe you
Yeah, for
want to
that we
mention
are
it.
willing to stop deforestation
On the
adopt more renewable sources. But like we said, for renewable sources we need funding.
To expand on that, I think we suffer from very high unemployment rates, a lot of subsistence farming. In order to maintain subsistence farming for our people, we need large amounts of land. Our population is growing, we need our land to grow. What is this leading to? Higher rates of deforestation, as you mentioned. We are willing to curb this. How though? Our big problem is that in order to do this, we need to reduce our unemployment. Renewable energy can help us by creating jobs. We need the funding. We are not here to say that we want coal-fired power stations. We just want to reduce our energy poverty for the people and reduce poverty as a whole. If we can do it through renewable energy, through funding that this committee can grant, we are all for it. We want to come to the table and reducing our emissions, but we want to be able to do it. If we can't do it, we can't reduce deforestation. So we can commit to reducing deforestation. However, afforestation is a bigger issue for us. We are willing to provide the land if we have the funding. We cannot fund the plantations of new trees. We don't have the funds to redirect towards that.
The developing nations are willing to sponsor the funds and the knowledge and expertise to protect the Brazilian and Congolese rainforests. We have vested interest in protecting biodiversity in our world, what is left.
So they're getting the funding then, or how much of the funding?
Yes, if we have to speak figures out of the funding that you suggested, we've discussed before $100 billion fund that will mostly be generated from your pockets. I suppose, at least in our opinion, since they've successfully grown over the last 2 decades, they should carry part of the cost of this fund.
2 decades compared to.
No, I'm not saying you should contribute equally. I'm saying you should contribute an amount. I mean, you have some of the strongest economies in the world included in it. I mean, they've got Eastern Europe, all of the economies together make up the Chinese one.
So you prefer contribution to a fund instead of decreasing emissions?
No, I'm saying the fund is going to decrease emissions. I'm saying that they can't carry the whole brunt of it. I mean, in previous climate agreements, as China, you've refused to come to the table. You can't play it safe now and say, yes, we will do it, but history shows you haven't. Committing funding will show that you are really committed to this.
We can commit funding, but like we mentioned before, it would be directed towards developing the technologies we need to reduce emissions going from here on forward. So if you need funding to go directly to you, it may not be much compared to them, but it would be directed to
No, we're not saying that the flow of funds must be directly from you to us. We're saying that you've got together fund one fund from which we get a percentage and you get a percentage to reduce emissions since they already have the cleaner technology as Jessica mentioned.
Yes, so actually what you said.
I mean, further than that, you guys carry 40% of the world population.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, we will contribute, but you guys are basically right now the biggest polluter. You have China, right? Which is the biggest. You also need to put some funds in there because you are not as good as they are.
Like we said, we are willing to put some funds down, but you also need to keep in mind the fact that we also carry the bulk of the what's called the population. So it is expected to have high emissions compared to them, but our funding will not be.
Also, if we want to, the goal of this is to reduce global poverty. We possess most of the global populations.
We're the ones that need to be improved.
So should we not then be granted a bit of leeway to have some economic growth? Because say we emit as much as, well, these graphs are showing that we're emitting a lot now. And if that goes on for the next couple or so decades, that would then almost equal your guys' emissions.
Stop you here. We need another 3 to 5 minutes. You focused mostly on the fund, but I didn't hear anything on the emission reduction pledges.
Yeah.
So take the next 3 to 4 minutes to discuss on your emission reduction pledges. Okay, the percentages and the years of cutting.
Yeah, so I think the agreement has been sort of that developed and mostly developing countries should sort of fund the reduction in the least developed countries. But how?
The percentages that you're prepared to.
Yeah. Funding is something that can be arranged later. Yeah.
We do have a China.
So in terms of our emissions, I think it's fair to say, at least from our point of view, that we cannot afford to reduce our emissions. We are willing to, as I mentioned earlier, our main goal is to reduce our energy poverty and access to energy. This is going to create more energy consumers, so our emissions are going to increase, undoubtedly. What we are willing to commit to is to reduce the rate at which our emissions increase over the next 3 decades. As Valianga mentioned, we are willing to adopt renewable energy if we have the funding for it. However, we cannot, as of right now, state a year in which our emissions will start to decrease, but we can put an economic projection of willing to reduce once we reach a certain threshold of poverty or we become developed nations.
We won't take that because what happens if you never reach that threshold? We need commitment on paper.
No, that is my commitment. I'm saying when we reach developed country status, which is in terms of income.
You need to commit to something because what happens when you don't reach that threshold?
So maybe put on the table what's your specific.
Okay.
Because you might just be
In terms of generation means what are you willing to do, and
you might just be getting more income or you're getting richer, but maybe the income is unequally divided between the population. So suddenly you have a chunk of the
And I'm talking
population.
income per capita.
We also have several
Talking
concerns
income per
about
capita.
corruption within your states.
Okay. Okay, yeah, that's fine.
would it be possible to discuss the measures you are willing to take to address this incredible corruption?
Definitely. And as, holding most of South America and Sub-Saharan Africa, we are also willing to commit to the acts by the International Criminal Court in terms of our
All states.
politicians. All states in our countries.
All states.
Yes.
And
Including Sudan.
Okay.
Can you commit with it?
So we are willing to commit fully to this. It seems that we are both willing to commit fully while the developing A nations are a bit of a fringe player right
we're
now.
not a fringe player. We are
We're the majority.
We're the majority. So technically speaking, you do have to give us some form of leeway. So yes, what we are willing to do is to reduce. So yes, what we are willing to do is reduce our emissions by
1%.
by 2050.
By 2050.
Yes, 50. Yes, by 2050. And during this time, we would be developing, hopefully if things go according to plan, we would be developing the technologies we need to actually hold our emissions constant and then start reducing them 10 years from then.
So 2060 euro.
2060, we aim to start reducing our emissions.
But guys,
That's our aim.
you are the biggest polluter. You need to start.
You have
reducing
No,
it.
you've been the biggest polluter. So
But
you technically.
But we take responsibility for that. But
You don't.
What,
No, you
we
don't.
didn't know.
What? How
We didn't.
much are you reducing your emissions by?
We are proposing to start reducing ours by 2025.
So how much?
2025.
Yeah, 2025
By how much?
By 2%.
By how much did you say, sir?
Reducing our emission by 2% by 2025. And we are committing by 2040 it will start declining. So we also need you to start at a bit earlier. 2060 is
If we are honest, I think that these commitments are, at this point now,
Is that feasible?
maybe not
I think
feasible,
that's
but
a very
I would
good question.
qualify it as insufficient.
Yes.
I think
From
we have the
both.
knowledge. I think we have the knowledge.
And
to
what
do
measures
that.
are you going to put in place in order to achieve those reductions?
Uh,
And that goes for all the nations.
Yeah, we're trying to implement a trading scheme in all developed nations. So that where we just be setting a certain threshold for emissions every year.
But the majority of your countries are already prone to emission trading schemes.
Yeah,
Yes.
except Australia.
No, Australia does have one.
They are
And
trying
New
to,
Zealand has one that wants to join part of
but they
Australia.
did repeal the carbon tax. Remember, we're gonna introduce that.
So, how are you going to cap your emission trading scheme? And where are you going to redirect that funding towards that you generate from?
Probably to other renewables and to find some of
Can you
Some
send
of your
some our way?
countries.
Okay. Do you think it's feasible to say that 2% reduction from developed countries and 1% from the richer developing countries would be sufficient?
what about yours. You haven't given
Remember, I've mentioned that we have to increase.
No, I would agree to this.
You'd agree to
Yes.
what, sorry, Rosie? So
We
the
will
number
commit to
being
2% reduction if the developing nations commit to 1%.
Okay. Is it agreed upon?
So the dates as well then. So we've got, because we need a longer timeline.
Yes.
And with regards to policies on how we do it, I think China has been very lax on regulations.
That's very true.
So it's a simple way just to impose a bit of regulation, be a bit more stringent on our emissions. And then, yeah, that's a simple way. That's actually a feasible policy.
Would it be possible to for China to address some of the shocking pollution that we hear about?
Well, that is what we're going to be doing.
How will you be doing this? And how
Well,
will
it's
you measure?
regulations, because it's sort of been a free for all in China for the past couple of years. So that is a relatively easy way.
And what we are going to do is we are going to tailor our policies to the respective industries within each economy. That way we don't apply a one size fits all type of policy to all industries.
And how will this be evaluated and how will it be monitored?
That is yet
Building on that, not only how will it be monitored, you mentioned that you're going to develop newer technologies. Would it be feasible for China, which is so industrial, to actually start being reliant on renewable energy? And if so, what renewable energy are you targeting?
That would be challenging. to be honest. So what we'll do is, that's why our main focus is on developing energy efficient technologies. If we can develop these technologies, implement them into our own industries and production processes, it would allow us to be able to use the energy that we have available to us, but actually ensure that our emissions not only reduce over time, but that we'll actually be able to curb them much sooner than expected.
But we'll be able to
Okay,
move
can
back
I
to
please
committee
have your
another day.
places now? And then we will start with the developed countries 2-minute description of the pledge and reasoning for the pledge.
Roula, do we only hand in one?
Yes, you can have one per country group.
And then
Okay. I would like to have the pledges before you go on the presentation, because your pledges cannot change depending on what you hear from other country groups.
And remember that the whole thing of the Paris Agreement as well is signing a binding contract that binds all the countries involved to be responsible and check on each other that they are following the pledges and agreements that are being reached. So that should address some of the concerns of the corruption and who's going to check on China that is actually doing what they pledged to do.
So what's the sort of stick, the threat?
Roula, your fractional rate is definitely looking at like actual reduction of emissions or
But
reduction in the growth
because
rate?
that's why
Between
the
0 and 1.
Kyoto
I want 0 and 1
Protocol
for deforestation.
Yeah.
Because
No,
there
no,
was
no,
no
the fractional rate of decline.
So
For the
it's
one above the
sort of like
other.
once you
It's
say
an annual
reduce
one.
emissions
Yes,
by
I mean,
2%,
is that reduction of
and
CO2
A, B, C,
emissions
and D to do
or
it.
just
I don't do
reduction in the rate
our
of
interests
CO2
that well. I
emissions?
think
Reduction of
we too much
CO2
about the forests.
Yeah.
We didn't do a very good
Okay.
job.
Can I have the pledges from the developing countries? And then the developed nations representative go to the podium.
We, the developed nations, are very satisfied with the outcome of the first round of negotiations. We pledged that we would, that our economies would stop the growth of emissions by the year 2025, and that we will work to see a decline in those emissions by the year 2040, and this decline will be about 2%, conditional, obviously, on China's ability to also likewise reduce their emissions by 1% in the year that they specified they would. As well, we are willing to aid the developing B bloc with afforestation, and we are willing to provide technology and technical expertise on how to do this, and also funding. We are very pleased with the agreement we made with Developing Bloc about, especially about corruption, and their agreement to subject all states to international law. We are very pleased with our agreement reached between ourselves and Developing Bloc A regarding pollution in China, and we are excited about the prospects that might arise from this dialogue that we've started about monitoring and reporting the various efforts to reduce their pollution. As the developed nations, we alone pledge 100 billion rand to the, not rand, dollars, sorry, dollars, to the Global Fund for Mitigation and Adaptation. Yes. Thank you
very much. Developing A countries, representative.
All right. Taking into consideration the large gap between the emissions of developing A countries as well as the developed nations, we believe that developed nations do need to contribute finances and the technologies that we need in order to move forward from here on out. And we are happy with the conditions that they have stated so far. As expected, our emissions have increased drastically over the years as we have been working towards improving our economies as our group holds the bulk of the world's population. But then we also have to keep in mind the fact that developed nations have been growing since the Industrial Revolution, and they need to give developing nations the room that they need to grow, both Block A and Block B. We are committed to reducing our emissions. Our emission growth will stop by 2050, and it will start to decline from 2060 onwards, starting from a percentage of 1%. And this is mainly because we believe that within that decade, we will be implementing the policies and the regulations that we'll need to monitor our industries within the economy. And it will also allow us to develop and actually make our carbon markets more efficient so that we reduce levels of corruption when it comes to emissions trading. And yes, and when it comes to deforestation, we have agreed to reduce our deforestation by 50%, not entirely 1, but not 0 either, because we believe that there are many industries within our economies that rely heavily on on forests. And as for afforestation, we have committed to increasing that by 50% as well, as this is mostly going to be focused on countries such as India, Brazil, and South Africa, as we believe that they hold, number one, they're not only big countries, but they do have conducive climate that will encourage the growth of these forests. And as for our region's contribution to the Global Fund, it will be $10 billion US. And all of these we have agreed to on the condition that developed countries stick to the conditions that they have stated.
Thank you very much. Developing B countries representative.
Okay. As developing and very poor nations, I think all of us do recognize that our emission rates at this time, if we actually want to attain growth, should be higher. Yeah, I put in quotes, compared to others who have already attained growth and development. So, with that being said, we are committing to reducing carbon dioxide emissions by the year 2050. And carbon dioxide emissions decline start year for the developing nations is 2070. And the fractional rate of decline for our nations, 0%. Also, when it comes to reduction in emissions from deforestation and land degradation, we pledge 0.8% of the land. Okay, and when it comes to growing of new forests or afforestation, we pledge half of the entire land. So, our region's contribution to the Global Fund mitigation and adaptation, when it comes to that, we need funds. As developing nations, we need funds. When it comes to investing in renewable energy sources, we need funds more from the side of developed nations. So we are saying that the budget that has been made available from these nations, say if it was $100 billion, we need 80 to 90% of that amount in order to invest in renewable energy sources. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so after our first round of proposals, if I can make a few If I can make a few comments on the negotiations that just occurred. The one big topic where all the countries focused on was the collection of funds and the use of funds and the contributions in the fund. So I think you've established very well that the funds should be collected by primarily the developed countries, and secondly by emerging economies, the developing A countries, and primarily be used by the developing poorer countries. There was almost an agreement in that, except for between the two developing country groups problems or disagreement there on what percentage should each use and who should use the effects or the products of the research and development activities in these funds. The second thing was the deforestation and forestation. The discussion came between the developed and the poorer countries with regards to commitment on deforestation and afforestation. Much less discussion was made on the percentages of the reduction of your emissions, and even less on when each of these things happen. It was almost as if the country groups announced this is when it's going to happen, and then there was some discussion on it should happen earlier or give us a little bit more time. But that was a very small fraction of the overall negotiations of round one. With regards to the fund, I think from your pledges, it is obvious the developed countries pledged the full 100 billion for the fund. The developing countries, the emerging ones, the strongest developing countries also pledged the $10 billion to the fund, while the poorer countries, developing big countries, decided they cannot afford to participate in the collection of funds, but they would like to use the majority of the funds. To look now, remember the goal of your session was to keep the temperature at levels below 2 degrees Celsius. So I would like, before we go into the actual model, to see what you believe you have achieved. So how many of you believe that you have reached a 3.5, a plus 3.5 temperature change?
I don't think we even reached there.
No.
I think we're still above it.
So that's bad, right? Yeah. I think we might be there.
The idea was to reach below scenario C. Okay? Do you believe you have gone below the business as usual?
Kind of.
So, with your discussions and what you've done, do you think we've done better than Paris?
No.
Definitely not.
Not better than Paris.
I don't think so.
Yeah,
The richest developing countries were fighting hard. Okay. So let's see now what actually round one have done. So developed countries said they will stop growing their emissions by 2025.
Yeah.
Okay. You see immediately how the graph is adjusted. They say that the CO2 emissions, or they propose it will decline from 2040. Okay. The reduction rate they're proposing is 2. Okay. Deforestation, 0%.
Like we didn't deforest. We done
Afforestation, 100%.
We're gonna help you guys.
Creation.
We should take a dive.
Just to help us see what we're doing in comparison to Paris, this graph here, the purple and yellow, the black shows business as usual, purple shows our current scenario, and yellow shows the Paris outcome. Okay. So let's look at developing A. Developing A pledged that their emissions will stop growing by 2050. They will start declining by 2060. And the annual reduction will be 1%.
Yes. Yes.
Not bad, you see?
I'm going to get you guys around too.
Deforestation 50%.
That's good.
Afforestation 50%. You can all see that the temperature increase that you have currently is plus 3.6.
We're not going to change it that much.
That's where I'm going. Because the developing B
They're going to
say their emissions will stop growing in 2050.
Yeah. Decreasing.
I'm not sure how to understand that one though. Decline from 2070, but 0%.
I don't know, we could put, I thought that we meant over the whole period and we
No.
could put a negative.
No, it's from like when you say 2070.
Oh, okay,
it
no,
was like
then,
reducing.
then it's a 1.
That's a one.
It's a one.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
because
why there was a one.
Otherwise, it's a growth.
Yeah.
It's like a plateau that
Yeah.
you know.
I
Yeah.
thought it was,
Yeah.
You did better than Paris.
Much better than, okay,
Wait.
We're not much better.
Yeah.
You are on par.
But in whose world would you rather live in the future?
Okay. So your goal for this session,
we need about deforestation. Just to show that we are committed.
okay, that was 80.
Yeah.
And that's
100.
okay.
yes, 3.3 degrees Celsius.
That's
So your goal for this session was to go below 2. You did plus 3.3. Do you know what this means?
We die.
1 meter sea level rise this session. 7.4% increase in the global portion of land under drought. 17% of the global human population experiences severely reduced availability of fresh water compared to today. Doubling of wildlife damage compared to 2.23 scenario. 21 to 52% of plant and animal species will be committed to extinction due to climate change alone. Nothing else. And long-term equilibrium warming, that's centuries to millennia, that's the forecast after 2100, between 6 and 8 degrees. Okay, so the first round has failed. There's no other description of the first round. Whatever the success of the first round was, the fun. That was the success of the first round. Now we're going to go to the second round negotiations. However, before we do that, I would like to demonstrate to you what it means when we say the sea level will rise and some countries will be underwater.
blanket.
Please don't cover us. Sorry.
Okay.
Shh, we're going for a nap.
So now you have.
So that's the thread.
We died.
They're going underground. Wow,
We're going
underwater.
underwater.
Yeah, we're down to the ground.
So this is a demonstration of how the sea level rise under your commitment will make these countries disappear. So if you just wanted to get one country group out of the negotiations, you just made it. They're not going to be in the negotiations of 2100. Okay.
Yeah.
We laugh, but it's a sad reality. Let's go to round 2. Now you already know how to deal with that. I would propose not to go through the fund discussion again, since you've reached an agreement, and try to find other ways of going on about the emission reduction and the years. Okay? I'll give you this time only 10 minutes, because you've done most of the discussions. And then we'll have the places again.
But I think we should change the day which we say we start reductions to like something like that. Like China to a higher reduction. I don't know if we can get them to do that, but what we can do is maybe we can push out the rate of reduction higher if we assist them. If they want some kind of assistance or technological assistance or something. We can maybe do that.
Finland will be able to touch anything on the UN contributions. So what would be like we should push them to reduce
Yes, which will definitely be something of the technology.
No, I'm not having them too.
Can you ask about the funding in South Africa?
Okay, so we have seen that we didn't really achieve our goals. In a quick nutshell, as developed countries, you caused half a degree Celsius reduction in global temperature, so it's not bad. Developing A, 0.4 degrees, us 0.3 degrees. That means we dropped temperature by 60% of your goals and 75% of developing A. So I think that as both developed and developing A, more could be done. Our proposal is we need to reduce the peak years for both, not for both, for all three
We agree.
countries.
We agree.
And
That's fine.
the reduction years can also be reduced.
Okay.
We commit, or we propose, that a binding agreement in terms of renewable energy generation needs to be reached. Secondly, and I know Roula mentioned not to get into this, but we propose that if the fund were to increase, as developing B countries, we could reduce our peak years from 2050 to 2040. And we could start reduction of emissions by 2050 rather than 2070, and increase the rate from 1% to 1.5%, while increasing afforestation from 0.5 to 0.8, and deforestation from 0.8 to 0.9.
And
As well as all the previous agreements with corruption.
what is the size of this additional contribution?
We believe 140 billion to be sufficient.
Extra?
No, total. So we are on 110. So even extra 30 billion.
As developing nations, we feel that a large amount or a large portion of this additional funding should come from Block B.
We agree. Not B, A.
Block
B,
A,
we
sorry,
have no
sorry.
money. Don't ask us for
Sorry,
money.
block,
from block A.
from them.
I agree. I think that a fund contribution of 10 billion out of 110, which is 9%, to be insufficient considering that they are going to be the largest emitters.
And we need
We're
block.
gonna get stuck in the fund.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I'm just saying that so we
Yeah,
can
I
get
just
to
want
that.
to. What is the developer
Yes, what are
proposing
you
as
gonna
their
do?
new targets for reducing?
Yes, what are you gonna do so that, yeah.
Yeah, okay. We will pledge to start reductions earlier in the year 2035. It's 5 years earlier.
And we're gonna start planting trees because Yeah.
We will also increase the rate of this reduction to 2.5%, but there are certain things that we would like.
Yeah,
Like-
we feel strong about this.
In addressing Block A, we wish some assurance of the protection of fynbos in the various biomes in South Africa.
Yeah, we feel strong.
But I
about
think
that.
before we get into the technicals there, how are you gonna commit to this huge decrease that you've got now?
Yeah, and
Because I believe we are fairly reasonable in our predictions of what we can do. I think you are negotiating in bad faith by claiming stuff that you can't really produce or achieve.
No, we've got
Such a
we've got
big decrease in your emissions.
So we will fund more research and development, which I think all of us will benefit from, and find ways how we can reduce emissions.
So you carrying in the 140 billion that the developing needs?
No, but you also need to contribute, and we'll ask you guys to start reducing a bit earlier, because
We agree.
2060
Developing B, we agree.
Yeah. 2050 is a bit far, and 2070 is even more. You need to come down a bit, maybe by 10 years.
Or maybe if you start decreasing a lot earlier, then you can also
We
cover.
have.
Are you
So 5 years.
satisfied with the date that we suggested?
No.
You're not satisfied?
No, I think you have had the run of the mill for the past century.
But let's not forget here that as developed countries, they provide international aid to both our group and your group. Reducing their emissions would also substantially reduce the contribution to the fund, as well as any help that they could provide to both A or B. I think that we're going about this all wrong by saying that there should be a tit for tat. You're not doing it, I'm not doing it. I think that both as A in developed countries and as B, we need a bit of assurance from both of you saying, as you mentioned in the first round, that, okay, no, we agree to this only if China agrees to it. We are all coming to the table together here in order to reach an agreement. We are the hardest hit by natural disasters, by climate change. We are highly dependent.
Same as we are.
No, not the same as we are. We can see just by the experience. It's our countries that suffer the most. So due to this, we need a bit of an agreement. We are also highly dependent on both of you. Some of our countries are basically run by some of aid. So we can reduce our dependence if you guys come to the table as your group of countries. Not only through the increased funding I had to mention, we acknowledge the commitment brought about by the developed countries of trying to reduce their emission targets and increasing the rate at which the emissions would grow. But we feel that A should start or should reduce the peak time period. 2050 would give you another 34 years of growth in emissions. And a 1% reduction when we're talking another 60 years down the line from where we are today to be insufficient. We believe that more can be done, especially considering that you met the largest portion. I'm not binding an agreement. I don't know what is possible for the countries. I'm just saying that more needs to be done. We have pledged as much as possible from our side, and now the ball's probably in your court.
Yeah, it's basically you. But
Just keep in mind that even though we did set the date to 2050, as we grow, as we develop, we are going to be coming with better ways of performing certain tasks. We are going to be coming up with certain technologies to get rid of to reduce the emissions.
As well as increasing your productivity and speeding along your growth.
While we're doing that, our aim is to reduce our emissions in the long run. So 2050 years is the official target, but we may actually start beforehand. Yes, you need a binding agreement, but also we need a binding agreement as to the conditions that have been stipulated by the developed nations. They seem pretty unrealistic, given the level of technology that we have, the energy resources that we have, and the costs that are going to be incurred, even though, yes, you do want investment in renewable energy resources.
And if we mentioned, they can follow Sweden's path. They have that access to the technology that they follow. They've come to the table saying they are. The only ones hampering this is your group of countries that saying we are stuck and we refuse. It's great that you have a lot of technology in 50 years, but if we don't have where to put it, it won't help.
The developing bloc wishes to hear the environmentalists.
So I think one thing we cannot underestimate and we need to take into consideration is, yes, the developed world emitted for many years and they are at a level of emissions. But we cannot underestimate the emission growth in the developing world. especially as we mentioned that the developing world will be the one that will be mostly affected by climate change. So yes, it's unfair in a way that the developing world didn't have the time to grow emissions, to grow their economy, but we need to think about the planet as a whole. We cannot all say, okay, we're going to carry on emitting because we need to have economic growth. We need to find a way of emitting, reducing those emissions at a rapid rate while achieving this economic growth in especially the developing big countries.
I'm going to use you as our mediator. Our offer is very reasonable. We're pledging to reduce emission to threaten our emission by 2025, and by 2035 it starts going down. Yeah, 35, which is reasonable.
And we are increasing our rate.
Yeah. If you can try to get them, yes,
Yes,
from 2 to
point-
2.5.
Yes, 0.5%.
If you can get them to just start reducing a bit earlier, maybe 10 years earlier, because 2070 is.
All right,
And
no, it wasn't 2017.
No,
it
it's
was
2060 and 2070.
All right, my only,
Yeah,
my
So I want
only
if you
thing is,
can win your reduction, your decline, maybe to
I think
2060.
in
All right,
order
can
to
we
end this
also-
discussion, what is needed in
What
order
is
to
it?
reduce both? I mean, I understand that you've already reduced your target. Would it be possible with certain criteria to reduce them even further and to actually shift you from your unwavering perch of refusing to
we're
move
not
at all?
refusing. We're not refusing. The reason why we had said 2050 in the first place is because they're the ones that said that they are more they have the technologies and they have the resource and they have the research. So what we feel is that if they reach these targets by the date that they've set, at least it will set a precedent for us as emerging markets, as emerging economies, to see the path that we can follow. Yes, we are doing our best to
So you tell me that if they fail, we all die?
no, we're not failing. That's not. Yes, we do have. We are going to put our efforts into finding ways. Yes, we are. But we want to see them first
No, we
and
can't.
see what
Yes,
they
but
can
We
become.
can't say
So by
that their
2050,
presidents in 20 years is going to dictate your actions.
no, it's not. We already have a set plan. What we're saying is we want to see what they can achieve with what they've done so far, so that it won't take us an extra 30 years to get to what we want.
Let me just-
but we can actually end up using only 5 to 10 years to achieve what they've done in order to apply to us.
It's
Let's just go back to the idea that it's not develop against developing.
Yeah.
It's population against
Well, we have
the world.
We have the biggest
against
population.
Earth.
And
Because the
you're
problem
hampering
is,
them.
no, the problem is
You want
what's
to
it
have them
called?
to grow.
We want to help them grow.
Well,
We
money,
reduce
but
our
also
emissions.
what's going
Would-
to
would you
look
be-
at like the simulation of Shanghai. You're going to have Shanghai, one of your main powerhouse cities, underwater.
And look at
So yes, you'll have economic growth, but you're also going to have to buy scuba diving gear to get to walk. So it's not really going to be extremely
And
helpful.
look at the quality of air in Shanghai and Beijing. Is it Beijing, the capital city?
Click and
Yeah.
Tokyo.
We're trying. We're trying. It's not like
Will you be willing?
we know this. We are trying.
Can I have
stop
all
it.
the country groups pledges, please?
Yes. If you start technology,
Put it down.
you reduce your emissions by 10 years.
Can I have your pledges?
Thank you.
I propose that as Donald Trump, Baleanga, you link them all so that they don't like hamper our efforts anymore.
We've not Donald Trump in this thing. It's just
Yeah.
2.5.
I will focus only on the emissions pledges and the years. I'm not gonna look at the fund this time.
Oh,
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
Negative. Can I contribute negative to the fund?
Thank you. Thank you.
And
Developing
A.
Your pledge?
these guys.
It's
We need a moment. Yeah.
Cancel myself, basically.
China should qualify when
Can we vote to send Region 8 to Mars as the first people so that they don't?
developing a pledge, please.
Yeah, China, India, all of you go.
Can I have developed?
Also South Africa. Also South Africa is going to go to.
Can I have the representative of the developed group present the pledge, please, and the reasoning behind it? Thank you.
Hi. Okay, we were not successful in our first meeting, and hopefully we'll be this time.
the whole point here is not us against you or against you. We're trying to do something for all of us. And when you think about it, you'll be affected the most. We can see survive for another 100 years. So maybe it's about time we become serious separatists and commit to CO2 reductions. So for the developed nations, we're committing to stop CO2 emissions by 2025. That didn't change, still the same. But the decline will start in 2035, so 5 years earlier than we planned in the first agreement. And we're going from 2% to 2.5. We're going to do this by investing more in research and development in order to find some new technologies that can help us reduce CO2 emissions. And the other thing is we're planning to swap technologies with Block A, Block B, so you can also be very effective in reducing CO2 emissions. So that's basically it. Thank you.
Thank you. Developing A, representative.
You see, it's bad faith by developing A.
Also?
I want to oppress the Secretary General.
So that's how we go about it. Okay, so we, as the developing A nations, we accept the developed nation, or to a certain degree. I think they are being very hypocritical by asking us to reduce our emissions and to take a big hit, whereas if you look at the GDP per person, they are far above us in almost any, they are far above us in terms of GDP per person. So while we accept to a certain degree their commitments, I think there should be more done on their part. They have been enjoying a long run of uninhibited growth, so we would like to see some more concessions made there. In terms of our concessions, the GDP or the CO2 emissions growth stop year, we've agreed to go down by 10 years, so 2040. I think we are acting in good faith. This is a reasonable target. It is achievable for us. We will start declining our emissions in 2050. And we have also increased that rate of decline to 2%. We've also made some concessions in terms of the deforestation and afforestation, in terms of afforestation, up from 0.5% or 0.5 to 0.8. To fund this, we have withdrawn the 10 billion that we have previously pledged. We need that money now. That is going to go into research and development. Look forward to hearing from the hood.
Thank you. Developing B. Thank you. You gain some, you lose some. I didn't know that part.
So, good afternoon or good morning, everybody. I am the representative for Region B, and just as a quick recap of what we have proposed in the second round of negotiations, we believe that an increased or commitment towards the percentage use of renewable in the energy mix of each country for all regions should be binding, the percentage of which has not been agreed upon yet. Second, we presented a motion in order to reduce the peak years of emissions as well as increasing the rate at which emissions would reduce. All country groups have adhered to this, even though some have not adhered as much as others. In a recap of session 1, developed countries would contribute to a decrease in global climate temperature by 0.5 degree Celsius, while region A of 0.4 degrees, region B of 0.3 degrees. Since our main asset as country B is not only our population but also our forest, we have agreed to increase or reduce our rate of deforestation as well as increase in afforestation thanks to the generous fund from developed countries. Furthermore, we have agreed that we would reduce our peak emissions from 2050 to 2040, so a decade, as well as increasing our emissions from 1% or reducing the rate by 1% to 1.5%. I think one of the main conditions that's hampering our progress in the session is the fact that developing A is attributing our pledge to reduce emissions as a reduction in economic growth. We are not asking for you to slow down your economic growth or to even nullify it. We are asking for you to continue your economic growth, which is beneficial for the entire world, with decreasing your emissions. So by improving your energy intensity and by improving your energy poverty as well as improving your energy efficiency. Subsequently, we believe that as Area B, which is even poorer than Area A, we have contributed a substantial amount to this round of negotiations, and we believe that Region A should do more. We are willing to come to the table with any suggestions or any help that could also lead to developed countries speeding up the peak as well as improving their emissions. And that would be all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so quick recap from what we've heard so far. It seems that it's the first time in history of climate change negotiations where developed countries and poor developing countries agree with each other. It has never happened before, I think, in the past. Interesting to hear that they both go on the one side, where the one says we give the money and the other one says we're not cutting much.
Can I just say then that I think that the developed are acting in bad faith?
Everybody's acting in bad faith except you guys. You're bad.
If historically they have never been on the same side, what's changed now?
Evolution.
No, we haven't evolved.
That is a very good question, Dylan.
That's a good question.
So I mean, if this is to simulate real life, then something's happening. I think Rosie has sort of infiltrated the.
Also, I'm speaking out of Tanya, but has it ever been that the developed countries have been willing to contribute the whole fund?
Let's keep these things for the feedback.
Yeah.
Okay? Let's keep these things for the feedback. Yeah. Okay. So let's see what you did this time round. Remember, there's nothing about winners and losers.
Nice. Would die
There
and lose.
are these losers.
We're all of us.
Everybody is losers.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, is that the first one or the second?
Yeah, it's 2025, 2025.
Okay, 2025, 2035. And they said 2.5.
Yeah, it's like it sounds great. But yeah, when you have to put the political issues in.
Okay.
Look at that.
Now, deforestation, 0 became 100.
Technically, they don't have much forests.
Did I write wrong?
Did you want to
Did
write
I
it the
write
other
wrong?
way around?
I wrote wrong.
Okay, okay.
Sorry.
Okay, now it makes sense.
I wrote wrong.
Because now the 100 you wanted to make it 0. So,
Sorry.
okay, so it's 0 and 100, like this.
Sorry.
Okay, now it makes sense. Developing A, 2040.
The activist commission.
2050. Sorry. 2%. $50, and then afforestation became 80.
Yes.
And developing B, they said 10 years earlier. Earlier, 1.5. It's 90.
Are you increasing your deforestation?
And
I
eight.
thought it was decreasing.
Yeah.
I like that looking at things that's really
forest.
Okay.
I like that. You have those there.
So, to debrief the session and then give feedback of the simulation of the module. Okay. To debrief the session, main arguments by all three country groups come to obviously finances, resources. There was not a single group that said, are you feeding the poor there?
Yeah, sure.
You see, we like environmentalism.
No, we share. Myself as environmentalist, I
No, but you see, you're only sharing with the rich, the poor, we don't really mind.
Because I'm pledging to the whole world that it affects us all, so.
Okay, so funding crucial for all three groups, as expected. Funding for research and development, funding for renewable energy development, funding for energy efficiency technologies. We heard a lot about funding. The moment the group realized that the first round was completely unsuccessful with this plus 3.3, they started bringing the things down, as happens in all types of negotiations. Okay, they put the things in table. Indeed, there was an improvement from 3.3 to plus 2.8. Still not the goal achieved, like we put from the beginning. But, however, we should remind ourselves that the goal of below 2 degrees change is extremely difficult to be achieved. But that's the whole idea of these types of negotiations. To also see that it's very difficult to be achieved and to realize what path we put the planet into. And it doesn't matter how much we will try now. We are already in this path.
Yeah, we should have done 100 years.
We should have done it 100 years. You see what a big difference is made if you do, if you decide to reach your peak here 10 years earlier. It makes a big difference. For those of you that are interested, you can go and download this. It's a very small program. Play around and see what will happen when. Okay. So to debrief the session, yes, indeed, it wasn't technically a successful negotiation based on our goal. However, it was a successful negotiation when it comes to pledges from different country groups. And realizing how important is climate change, how can I say it, intervention is needed as early as possible, even with higher cost levels. Okay, so now to go to the feedback of our module, I tend to agree with Dylan, not for the specific country group, but for the whole exercise of putting people into places where they don't believe the cause. Okay, it was more of an experiment from my side. We know Rosanne's and Balayanga's how can I say it, lifestyle, or not lifestyle.
It's like point of view.
They Democrats.
I would say cosmo theory. It's their beliefs, their belief system. We all know them. It's not, they don't try to hide it. Okay, the whole idea pro-climate change, pro-environment policies, pro-developing countries being out of the blame. We knew that. It wasn't new. And it shows it's difficult, even in a completely role-play exercise, to get some of your beliefs out of yourself. Because from their side, when the developing world was telling them, decrease your emissions, they were saying, okay.
Yeah, they link it to the stance to develop.
Deep inside them, they knew, they had this voice that was saying, I'm developed, but I can't decrease. Exactly. How much money? Let's increase the fund. How much money? Let's increase the fund. So, in that sense, it's a proof in the experiment that when you don't negotiate with your belief, but just in paper, some of the things are either, as Dylan put it, fake, non-achievable, okay, or the negotiation is not true. I also felt Louis at some point. I had to really look at sometimes, is that a developed or a developing nation? The strength of the arguments did not come from a developing country. It does not usually come from a developing country. A developing country does not say, we want the money. A developing country would say, we would like to get some of the funding.
That's why they never get it. You need proactive.
You see, it's the difference in attitude. It's the difference in attitude. So, if I put you in your roles, most probably we would be here until end of the month, until end of the week. We would be here forever because you would push your arguments. Now all the arguments were in between what you believe. With the two of you, actually, I was not sure with how to place you. That's why I decided to give you the difficult role of the rich developing countries, the emerging economies, because they are the most difficult. The others, their roles are very distinguished, very straightforward. These type of countries are in between everything. But I love the twist of the, okay, you want me to do this reduction, I'm taking my money back. it was genuine, it was brilliant. Yes, it was, yeah. You want to push me, I have my tools as well. That was brilliant. So, thank you all for the participation and sometimes the enthusiasm. I just want to remind to all of you how this will be evaluated now, because remember this role play exercise is 15% of your mark. So in this 15%, I will include assessment of your participation today. I will include assessment of your standing up here and talking for 2 minutes. And because I don't want only these two to be components of this 15%, I have opened 2 journals in your ClickUp. The one journal is, you'll see, the one is going to be where you are still the negotiator. So how you felt as a negotiator, what do you think still as a negotiator? And the other feedback is the student participating in such an exercise. What did you learn, what did you not learn? So these are the 2 journals that you need to submit as feedback. Also, before you leave, I would like you to please complete the post surveys. The pre and post surveys will be sent to the climate change, to the World Climate Initiative for their feedback for the sessions. So thank you all very much. I hope we all got something out of this. And good luck with the exam. Thank you.
Oh, Roula, can we come to the exam?
Yeah, this doesn't need to be.
You can record it. We have evidence.